Hello friends, my name is Host Eric. I am the host of Talking with Famous People, and I am here tonight to continue the breakdown of comparisons between MBTI types and how they make decisions. We've completed a number of types. I'm not going to recap those. I did in the GTM link video. Instead, I'm going to go straight into the pairs that I want to compare in this particular occasion, which are the ISTP and ISFP personality types. Now, the ISTP is a type that may be prone to mistype himself as an INTP, as Basement Overlord did, or it may simply be somebody who finds their type right away. I don't know, but I do know this, that their decision-making process is going to be substantially different than that of the INTP. So if you are somebody who is uncertain if you are an ISTP or INTP, one way that you can tell the difference is look at your own decision-making habits. So the ISTP begins with introverted thinking, and their main tool function is extroverted sensing. Now, this provides them a remarkably different process in coming to conclusions about things than the process the INTP, for example, would be familiar with. But I don't want to go into a comparison versus the INTP here, because I want to instead draw a contrast with the ISFP, who has the same stack, except they have FI in the dominant slot, followed by SE, as opposed to TI in the dominant slot, followed by SE. So these two types are going to be remarkably different types in how they make decisions. The ISTP tends to be decisive, tends to be practical, and to attain ends fairly easily. It's not difficult for an ISTP to make a decision, but it can be difficult for an ISTP to come up with possibilities, because while the ISTP is very strong in the acting upon judgments that have already been made by their thinking component, they're not as strong when it comes to generating possibilities and or evaluating how the conclusions that they've drawn might be disrupted by factors they didn't consider. So in the third slot, the ISTP has FI, and in the last slot, no, I'm sorry, in the third slot they have NI, and in the fourth slot they've got FE. Is that correct? Does anybody want to correct me on their on the ISTP cognitive function stack in case I got it wrong?
That's correct.
Okay, cool. So in that understanding things, their introverted intuition is going to give them whole truths. They're going to aspire to work with their thinking and their doing to create or to realize whole truths, I guess, not to create them, to realize them. And they should be quite effective at it. And so I think you'll tend to see ISTPs as sort of systems administrators and things like that, where they're able to execute a series of well thought out, consistent ideas. It's an odd pairing in the sense that the TI normally would go with an NE in terms of what's naturally fit with it, because the SE is going to be naturally more of a fit with ends-based logic in the real world. So there is a certain conflict within the ISTP in regards to those two, of having tools in both those two sides of the coin, in both conditionality in the TI and in causality in the NI, rather than having them paired as the ENTP does with the corollary. So at the end of the day, the ISTP is not somebody who has difficulty making decisions. They make decisions, they pull the trigger on stuff, and probably they're wise decisions because they judge first and then they proceed. I'll now open this topic up to any comments or chat things, or anybody have anything to say about it. Okay, so let's move now and look at the ISFP type. The ISFP is a type that I think is difficult to get to know, because I'm not sure they have an especially clear understanding of exactly who they are in the sense that other people anticipate an individual to have a clear notion of their identity. I think in the same regard, the ENTP doesn't understand how they feel in the way that others have a clear expectation that one ought to. And so in that regard, it's a ongoing challenge, I believe, for the ISFP to make decisions that are good decisions within larger frameworks. I think the ISFP is very well equipped to make good decisions in the moment and to be decisive in the moment. When I talked to famous person Zach Zakatak earlier this evening, and he's an ISFP, I related a story of another ISFP I know who tells of an occasion when she was stuck with a car that was broken down. And on this occasion, she called her male significant other, and they had been dating for a while, I suppose. I mean, longer than it was. It wasn't somebody she just started dating a week or two ago. Somebody that had been together for a couple months, and her significant other responded in ways that she really didn't like. That made her feel bad. She got very upset at him, yelled at him, hung up the phone, never talked to him again. And I ran this by Zach Zakatak to see if that was something that made sense. And he indicated earlier that it did, in fact, that he could see that that individual didn't want to deal with somebody who they saw was only interested in causing them to feel bad. Because there's nothing fighty about the ISFP type. If you're fighting with them, you're probably the problem. So the ISFP, when they're making decisions, they've got an issue of looking at it on a time frame thing. They know with their primary world, the ISFP is in touch with how they feel right now about whatever. I would assume, although I don't know what it would be like, that they may have compartments with different feelings in them that they can hold concurrently about different things. I don't know if that's the case or not. I posit it might be. I would posit that they're able to feel, to the extent that it's possible to do so, across all dynamics. They're able to have feelings about how they relate to systems, how systems relate to them. They can have feelings about individual relationships. They can have feelings across time, in theory. But see, there's the problem. They might be able to understand their feelings across time, but they don't function well as a judging function across time. Feelings are a great judging function for right now and for group dynamics. But when we become liberated from some of the constraints of small groups that are homogeneous and isolated, some of the utility of those feeling-based worldviews to the individual who possesses them is limited because of the way that the world in its contemporary state prioritizes thinking modalities so much over feeling modalities for most things about which one might need to make a decision. So that's why the decision-making component here is crucial in understanding how these cognitive functions play out for the ISFP. It's going to be, well, decision about what? When I spoke with Zach Zakatak on another video earlier, again, I'm going to reference him because he's an ISFP that I've spoken to recently and I've asked specific questions to. And one thing that he told me was that he feels as though he's got a history of making decisions to engage in things that he's not necessarily great at or that he doesn't really want to do. And that the parts that he really does want to do, he's kind of a compromise away from that. And I think he can correct me after I'm done because I believe he's here, but I think he indicated essentially that he'd like to be doing more of what he wants to do and less of the compromisey stuff. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I don't necessarily think it's indicative of a poor decision, but I think that Zach Zakatak's uncertainty regarding it may be indicative of an issue that the ISFP has with decision making in general, which is because it's not, they have TE as their third function. And so they look to protocols in the world. They're not particularly strong with it. They're not incredibly adept at noting, as Megbro would have said, the relations between objects in the world. But what they are is good at understanding, at least, that TE offers protocols to answer their question about how to do something differently. So there might be an indication where somebody says, oh, well, here's a criticism of you. The response will be either they think it's an honest criticism, in which case they want to know what's the protocol to fix this, or they think it's a dishonest decision and they're trying to hurt them, in which case they'll have nothing to do with you anymore. So I think that decision making for an ISFP is both easy and difficult. At the very least, I get the sense that it's self-informed, that the ISFP knows what they're doing when they do it, and they don't go home later and go, I wish I hadn't done that. They go home later and say, I'm glad I protected my feelings. That's my guess. Those are my thoughts on the ISFP and ISTP decision-making processes. If anybody has any feedback regarding these two types, either of them, I will be quiet and leave it open for audio or chat commentary.
It's the fourth function, TE, for ISFPs.
Oh, my bad. So NI is the third, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that would make it more so what I said. Basically, they look at it as a methodology they use to avoid mistakes. They know they're not going to win any offensive points on it, but they turn to TE to provide them some guidance as to how to avoid mistakes. With SI, same thing. I turned to SI to avoid having my electricity turned off, to make sure that my big ideas actually have enough follow through to mean anything. Same thing with the ISFP then, and in that order. Now with NI in the third, that's going to be aspirational. That's going to be whole truth aspirational, and it's going to be why somebody like an ISFP is going to be kind of wanting a finality and a conclusiveness to judgments about their decisions that will continue to elude them because they've got an odd mixture there, right? You've got FI, you're going to act on your feelings, and then you're going to say, now explain that to me logically in terms of the impacts on the world. Well, you acted on your feelings. The impact on the world was whatever it was, but trying to make sense of that, right? Trying to make sense of one's own behaviors, one's own habitual acting upon one's feelings, which gives them a certain amount of you have to honor the implicit honesty in the behavior. You know they're not going to pander or patronize or humor you or anything like that because they're acting on their actual feelings, which are malleable, but they change from time to time. That's why the TE is never going to really make adequate sense of it. So in the fourth slot, the TE just sort of looks to, well, what are the rules here? What do they say that people normally do? How can I improve on this thing? That's as far as they really get with TE, is trying to come up with a set of steps for solvency purposes. But the problem is, it's a tricky situation. If they don't understand whole truths particularly well, but it's driving their framework for how they can interpret meaning from acting upon their feelings. They want to interpret it in whole truths. Those whole truths are momentary truths, and they don't link well with each other. They don't construct any kind of framework, and even if they did, their extrovert thinking would try to understand it in terms of the impacts in the world, and it would be weak at doing so. So I suspect a lot of ISFP decision making then is informed by looking to instructions on how to do things when their whole truth framework fails to produce satisfying results. Now, comments and questions.
I think I would sort of disagree with the last part about the whole truth's not creating a good framework, just because I feel like NI, like that's what it's all about, is creating that like holistic kind of worldview. I think that's what it does.
I agree that's what it's all about. What I'm saying is, with the functions in that particular order,
it doesn't do it very well.
It doesn't suit. Yeah, it doesn't do its purpose very well.
Right. But like that being said, I mean, I definitely use it, and I'm conscious of when I use it, because I know that, like when I'm sitting there trying to fit my ideas into kind of fit them all together in a way that makes sense, I know that that's NI, and I do that a lot. And
I don't doubt, Zach Zacatech, that you can become extremely good at it as well, or maybe you already are. Now, I don't know what you think about my FE, or if you have any opinion about it at all, but I'm somebody who's actively working on my FE. Like this. This is FE. This is me trying to improve in that area. Me thinking about not just the fact that it doesn't matter what it looks like behind me. I'm saying words. All that matters is the meaning of the words that I'm saying. That's sort of my gut perspective on things. But I'm working on my FE. I'm working on my FE on a lot of different vectors because I know that it plays out in a lot of different ways. On the one hand, I want to make sure that people like me. That's sort of the baby level FE, but it goes up from there. So, I mean, I understand how your NI can end up being, could even potentially end up being the engine of the thing that you find your identity within.
I understand.
What are examples of whole truths?
Well, for example, the girl in the story I said about the car breaking down. To her, this was not something to be parsed any further, right? This person didn't make an argument there which needed to be answered. Neither did this person make an oversight that could be excused. In this woman's eyes, the person intentionally caused her to feel pain by being mean to her, and that whole truth caused her to hang up on him and never speak to him again, even though she'd been dating him for months.
I never heard this story.
Oh, sorry, that was earlier in this episode, but I assumed you. I wasn't sure when you got here, I guess. So,
I must not have been paying attention. Sorry.
That's no, you know what? My bad for saying sorry. First of all, there's no sorry in talking with famous people. It's just because otherwise it's a bunch of fucking FE dances. So the thing is, yeah, that to me is a holistic approach to that situation. Now, I'm assuming that an FI Dom doesn't do that every time they get their feelings hurt. I'm assuming that in this instance, her feelings were telling her this behavior of this guy is indicative of something about him that makes him fundamentally incompatible with me in a way that means I need to cut him off. Because another thing I will say about ISFPs is they want a challenge in terms of their intimate partner, and that they can be maneuvered by playing hard to get. So they're potentially manipulatable on that level if they're not aware of it anyway. And so I think they rely on their feelings to get to sum up, this guy is not cool, period. And then that's it. As opposed to an ENTP who will sit there and say, well, I know he said, fuck you, I hate you, I never want to talk to you again, Eric, but he could have meant a lot of different things by that. You know, it's the exact opposite, right? I'm a million miles from a whole truth. So, yeah. Any other comments on this?
Push an ISFP that far that it's like if you ever push an ISFP to the point that they yell at you like that, that's it's because it was a long time coming.
I see.
It's not just like she felt that way in that moment, but it's that, you know.
So she had suffered before some wrongs.
Well,
that
I think
had
so.
built up.
I think it's like I don't think an ISFP would just go like, you did this one thing bad to me. It probably has happened a lot in the past, and then it built up, like they bottled it all up until they snapped. I think that's what ISFPs do.
Well, I think in that instance, their feelings provides them an excellent means of solvency. So when it comes to decision making, we know that types sometimes can make good decisions in some areas and not so good decisions in others. For example, in an earlier video when I talked about the INFJ, I said how they're prone to make decisions to stay in relationships for far too long, even unhealthy ones. I think the ISFP then is going to have an advantage in those kind of situations if their feelings can convey to them whole truths that con man people style stuff can't explain away. Because that's the thing is, people range from you know, oh, I don't care how complicated the problem is, there's always a simple solution. They range from that to some extremely heavily parsed lawyery thing, where they say, well, you know, of course the definition of is going to be contingent upon multiple factors, blah, 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 blah. There's that range from NI to NE. NI is I don't mean to give NI a country accent to make it seem like more provincial or whatever, but rather that it's common sense truths, even when it's magically inventive. It's intuitively resonant. It's never artificial.
That definitely makes sense.
So, any other additional thoughts on this before we end this video? Contrasting ISTP and ISFP? Okay. Thank you so much for joining me if you've been here in the room. And thank you for joining us if you are watching out on your television, your internet television.